Starting recording. Okay, so welcome. I'm going to kick us off with our land acknowledgement to start with. So I am currently working in Austin, and as such, I am on the ancestral land of the Tonkawa, Cherokee, and Sana people. Our ongoing colonial presence on indigenous lands compels us to take action now to counteract the effects of colonization. And through the work we do with the TCI network is one small step towards that effort. And I would like to go ahead and welcome Dr. Christine Norton. She is with Texas State University, and she's going to be presenting today an outdoor adventure for youth in public housing, promoting connection and well-being. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. I know you have your cameras off, and I'm a big love and belonging kind of person, so I will just pretend like we're all in the same room together. But I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to be here today. I appreciate so much the work of the Texas Children in Nature Network, and I am just really excited to talk about this project that came out of some of my work at Texas State University. I wanted to kind of give you a framework or kind of an overall agenda for what we'll be doing together today. This talk is about a pilot research project that I have been engaged in, but it's actually about a partnership. And my hope and my intention, I do yoga, and so I like to set an intention. My intention for us being here today is that I will light a spark that will hopefully have a ripple effect across the state and potentially around the country, so that other partnerships, they certainly don't have to look just like this one, but other partnerships between universities and public housing and outdoor programs can emerge to better serve youth living in public housing. So without further ado, I will get started. I wanted to talk about well, first I want to say thank you to Sarah for the land acknowledgement, something that has really been important to me in my research and in my practice as a social worker, and also someone that practices in outdoor settings, is this connection to place. And if you think about a home, right, and the idea of having a stable, that housing stability, that is certainly one of our biggest anchors that we have in terms of connection to place, which is a protective factor for all of us in our mental health and well-being and our physical health and well-being. So when I think about what public housing is for, right, it was actually established as a mechanism to provide housing stability for low-income families so that they could get on their feet, develop more of that economic sustainability, those connections with the community. And yet it's kind of become the stigma, like, oh, these kids live in public housing. And so the first thing I just want us to do is to begin to reimagine and confront our biases and how we even think about youth living in public housing, and how they must feel, right? And sort of getting them to lean into more of a strengths identity. Part of that is because the research oftentimes looks at the risk factors or the challenges, right? So we know that youth living in public housing, a lot of times they face these chronic risk factors of chronic poverty, family violence, and addiction. But what we know is that housing stability can be a protective factor, and yet that might not be enough for positive youth development. So what is it that youth in public housing, what else besides having that stable, consistent housing that can help their families get on their feet, what is it that they need? And these are known as asset building experiences in the sort of positive youth development language. The other thing that we have to acknowledge, though, is that children living in poverty and children coming from marginalized communities, and what I mean by that, because our language really matters, is children living in communities that do not have the same access to resources or privilege that my children have in my neighborhood, right? And so in a talk like this, I can't not acknowledge things like white privilege, like class privilege, educational privilege, even the privilege of housing stability. So when we acknowledge those differences, it helps us, I think, not to pathologize or blame children or families who are living in public housing. And it helps us to think about, well, how do we create more access, equity and access to resources? And one of the greatest resources that we know that too often children from marginalized communities do not have is access to the outdoors. And it's interesting, not only access, but safety and mobility. So if you think about some of the recent headlines of African American bird watchers or runners or hikers being harassed and threatened, clearly they had access to the outdoors, but they were lacking in that safety and mobility. So for me, really thinking about how am I going to help these young people living in public housing not only have access to the nature around them, that nearby nature that we hear so much about that is so powerful, but also how can I help them feel a sense of safety and belonging in that space? So there's a great article. I'm a researcher, so forgive me if there's a lot of academic stuff in here. Some of you might like it and some of you might feel like you're back in grad school. But there's this really wonderful article by Forrest Bank, who's a researcher in Tennessee. And this is a chart that is in this article that is cited here on perceptions of risk, resilience, and positive youth development. And so it applies what's called a risk and protective framework. And one of the reasons why a risk and protective framework is so important is, again, because all of us develop in the context of our environment. And if our environment has lots of those protective factors, we grow and develop in a healthy way, just like a plant, right? A plant needs water and sunlight and healthy soil. So does a child. We know that. So when I was thinking about, this partnership and looking at these risk and protective factors, we've talked about a lot of the risk factors already, but I was like, well, how can outdoor adventure address some of these protective factors? And I thought, well, certainly opportunities for pro-social activities, rewards for pro-social activities, neighborhood attachment in the sense of connection to place. And when I talk about this project, it did take place in San Marcos. I know some of you are from San Marcos. And so we use the trails that are managed and maintained by the San Marcos Greenbelt Alliance. And many of these young people that were living in the San Marcos Housing Authority had no idea that these trails were even there, right? So there's this new attachment forming. Certainly, we wanted to also address the protective factor of having caring adults by partnering our students with youth living in public housing. And then also the ideas of like some of those internal assets of problem solving and social skills and having a positive attitude. A lot of that we hoped to develop in this work. So that's really the framework that we took, was this risk and protective framework, because I think no matter what we're doing, when we're trying to make the world a better place, right, we have to be really, especially those of us who identify as white, we have to be really clear about not coming in to be some kind of like a white savior, but rather really looking at the assets that exist already in our communities and just connecting people with those assets as a way of building that sense of well-being. So here's the background for the study. The background is that I am a social work professor at Texas State University, and I have the privilege and honor of having created and teaching a graduate social work elective in outdoor adventure therapy. I know you all want to go back to grad school or sign up for my class, because this is a picture of what we do. A lot of times people get really jealous because I'm not in a classroom, I'm outside. The outside is my classroom. So I taught that class for a while, and part of the class is theory, research, and practice. And the practice piece always felt kind of weak. What I mean by adventure therapy practice is the facilitation, the structured facilitation of therapeutic outdoor activities for personal growth and wellness. And so I wanted my graduate students to have an opportunity to facilitate with real people, not just with each other. And so many thanks to Jean Martin at the San Marcos Housing Authority and Maria Calcibin, two heroes that work tirelessly for youth and families in the San Marcos community, who said, sure, Dr. Norton, come on. And so we partnered with the San Marcos Housing Authority and their Poder Center, which is their after school program that just does incredible positive youth development work already with their students, tutoring, mentoring. They had a martial arts club for a while. So they were already excited about anything experiential and active for their youth. And we created this adventure club. And so the Adventure Club engages in therapeutic, adventure-based, and nature-based outdoor activities, primarily with elementary and middle school youth. The participation at the Poder Center kind of drops off with some of the high school age students. So we really targeted that elementary and middle school age group. And there's a picture of my class, all of us sitting on that log. For those of you that have ever done a low ropes course, that's out at University Camp in Wimberley. The university, Texas State University, owns this beautiful piece of property on the Blanco River. And this is a balancing log attached to 2 wires, and you have to balance on the log, and it's kind of a fun team building activity. So that was after we had successfully achieved that task. So you might be thinking, okay, well, aside from you wanting your students to have kind of a laboratory for practicing their adventure-based facilitation, what else is your rationale, right? Because we have to make sure that in any partnership, the benefits are equal. So certainly I wanted that learning benefit for my students, that service learning benefit, but I wanted to make sure that our efforts were research-based. So we know the benefits of nature on children and youth. There's so much research coming out right now, and I'm going to touch on some of that, in particular looking at mental health. And of course, we know the benefits of exercise, and then layered on top of that now, people are talking about the benefits of green exercise. So anything you might do inside on your Peloton, if you do it outside, it doubles the benefits, right? Because you're not only getting that kinesthetic engagement, but you're getting the fresh air and the sunshine and the vitamin D and all that good stuff. We also know about the benefits of informal and formal mentoring, right? So anytime we bring together peer or adult mentors and youth and children, right, there's this social capital that forms. There's this social learning that happens, and the relationships can be really, really powerful. We also know, based on some of our research in positive youth development, that extracurricular activities and group belonging are protective factors in childhood and adolescence. And so I'm always trying to link the research in my brain. And so for me, I got really excited when I read this study, because I have done studies that have shown that outdoor adventure actually promotes that sense of group cohesion and belonging. And I thought, okay, if outdoor adventure promotes that sense of connection and inclusion and group cohesion, and group belonging is a protective factor, then we are linking all kinds of goodness together in the lives of these young people. So those were some of my research-based rationale for why having an adventure club as a part of this after-school program in the Public Housing Authority was a good idea, not only for my students, but also for the young people that we were serving. I also went to the literature to look at the therapeutic factors of outdoor adventure experiences, and a couple of researchers with the Outdoor Behavioral Healthcare Council, Keith Russell and Lee Gillis, have created what's called the Adventure Therapy Experience Scale, and they've identified 5 factors that are present and have therapeutic value in an outdoor adventure experience. One is obviously nature. It's probably why we're all here on this call, is our love of the natural world and our both experiential and also scientific knowledge that nature is good for us and that we belong in nature and have this innate biophilia. The other thing is group adventure, right? When young people have this shared experience together, especially a positive shared experience, it can really promote healthy development. We've also found in the literature that like a little bit of challenge is good for people too, right? We don't want to overwhelm people or push people out of their comfort zone, but maybe to expand their comfort zone and getting them thinking like, I just did something I didn't think I could do. And we know that that has some transfer of learning effects for children and youth. And so we hope that we can begin to understand, the ripple effects of that new sense of self-efficacy. We also know that reflection and mindfulness are powerful components. So one of the things we knew we wanted to do with this adventure club was not just have a recreational experience, but also have opportunities for debriefing the experience and processing the experience so that youth could really begin to take that transfer of learning and that newfound self-awareness into other areas of their life, like their family or their schools. So there's a lot of research that's coming out right now about outdoor adventure, and in particular, outdoor therapy. And so I'm just citing two most recent meta-analyses citing the benefits of outdoor adventure for children and youth. And again, I don't like to read my PowerPoints because you've got it right in front of you. But just take a look at some of the benefits. Now, what a meta-analysis does, right, is it looks at all the research and it kind of identifies in what areas were there statistically significant changes across the board. And so the meta-analysis by Bowen, Neal, and Crisp looked at self-esteem, internal locus of control, changes in behavior, personal effectiveness, that self-efficacy component, clinical measures, so looking at issues like depression, anxiety, family problems, things like that. And then other interpersonal measures like self-regulation, self-control, things like that. And then the second meta-analysis by Bettman and another group of researchers looked even at some academic changes and then some of the same changes that we're seeing in the other meta-analysis. So we know that there are benefits, right? And so the idea is not that it's a cookie cutter approach, but to really then figure out what youth are interested, what youth are appropriate, and how can we do this in a way that promotes that physical and emotional growth and safety of our young people. We also know the benefits of nature, like I mentioned, and I think, like I said, I hope that this presentation kind of lights a spark and for a replication of new partnerships like this one. I think that if we're going to engage in any kind of practice, that we do so from a scientific perspective, that we have our evidence base going into program development and evaluation. And so I've shared a little bit of the research on outdoor adventure, but just the research on nature in general that's coming out right now. Aside from this huge systematic review that was conducted by Tillman and her colleagues, there's also a lot of research just showing a lot now coming out about dosage. So you've probably heard there was a study on, it was college age mental health, and it looked at, it's as little as 10 minutes sitting or walking every day in nature that showed a dramatic decrease in anxiety and depression. And then there was another adult study done in the UK that showed that as little as 2 hours a week can dramatically add to our sense of physical and emotional well-being. Certainly during COVID, this is so important. And we've seen people maybe who didn't usually think to get outside, going outside in droves because it's kind of been the only option we've had. And I think that this is a real silver lining of this pandemic, that more and more people are discovering that natural affinity for being outside and the positive impact it has. In this particular systematic review, the researchers really honed in on emotional well-being and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is obviously really prevalent among youth, and especially among youth living in poor socioeconomic conditions and youth of color. And there's probably an overdiagnosis happening, but what we know is that we need to create access to healing measures. And in fact, right now, Dr. Robert Czar is working at a pediatric clinic in Baltimore. He's the one who started Park RX and is now writing prescriptions for young people struggling with some of these conditions to get outside and experience the healing power of nature. So the research is there. And from a theoretical perspective, it's all about connection. That's my assertion. My assertion is that what we're trying to do is promote this trifold relational model where we help young people connect to themselves, and that self-awareness and that self-regulation and the ability to develop a sense of purpose and their own values and that kind of moral compass. And then, of course, we're trying to get youth to connect to each other, to their families, to their communities. And then finally, we really want to develop that sense of what's now being called in the literature nature connectedness. And there are a lot of benefits of developing a sense of nature connectedness, some of which I'll get into in this study, but our own personal sense of calm and well being, but also some of the research showing that when we feel more connected to nature, we then are more apt to develop conservation behaviors and mindsets, which means that really, to say it in very simplistic terms, we protect what we love, right? And so, so many young people have just never had that opportunity to fall in love with the natural world. And so part of this is a bit, intentional to develop a new generation and a more diverse generation of conservation voters and stewards of the land. But it also has that benefit to oneself. There's actually a beautiful theory called the reciprocal restoration model. I don't really talk about it in this presentation, but it just popped into my head that it's looking at conservation and land conservation. And so projects that you and your youth might be involved with in terms of like trail maintenance or removal of non-native species, anything you're doing to help the land heal, there's this theoretical belief that it also then helps you heal, right? It's called the reciprocal restoration model. It's just a beautiful framework. I know the Student Conservation Association has really begun to embrace that through their dual approach to transforming lives and lands. And I really think that that's something that we can be doing with our young people as well. So when we think about outdoor experiences, I also just wanted to kind of walk you through from a program development standpoint. There are two kinds of camps, right? There's this being in nature, which might seem a little more tranquil or peaceful. And then there's this doing in nature, which is a little more active and challenge and adventure oriented. And so they're both really beneficial. And I offer these as, again, maybe things that you're thinking, how could I bring this to youth in public housing where I live? Or how could my organization help partner? So activities that focus on being in nature might include forest bathing, horticultural therapy, nature meditation, and other mindfulness approaches, therapeutic landscaping, nature and awe walks, outdoor yoga, and like I said, conservation activities, right? Things that promote that reciprocal restoration. All of these things have great meaning. And so you'll see as I talk about the partnership we developed, we made sure to kind of bring these things together. Outdoor activities that focus on doing, right, are the kind of more challenge and adventure type activities. Outdoor team building, geocaching, low and high ropes, rock climbing, backpacking, canoeing, kayaking, mountain biking, all that fun stuff, right? Usually, I guess you could think of it as one involves gear and the other doesn't really involve that much gear. And so that might help you as you're thinking about budgeting and all of that. Really, though, there's a sweet spot here, and that is the integration of doing and being in nature. There's a great study done again by Doctors Gillis and Russell in the Journal of Mindfulness that looked at substance abuse treatment in a wilderness therapy context, and they used the adventure therapy experience scale to identify some of the components that were related to therapeutic change in this area of substance abuse. And one of the things was challenge and adventure, and one of the things was mindfulness. And so my takeaway from that research is that, we could run any kid through a ropes course, right? You could just be like, woo, yeah, they're like, climbing around having fun. And that has value. That has physical and mental health value. But when we also have them, maybe they climb up to the top and we say, hey, take a deep breath. Feel what's happening in your body. Look around. What do you see? What's it like to have the same view that birds have? What's it like to see the tops of the trees? What are you noticing in the natural world around you, right? So their heart is pounding, their little spaghetti legs are going like this. If any of you have ever done a high ropes course, that's how I get. But they're also noticing and they're self-regulating. And then you're bringing in that mindful component. So that's really what we tried to do in this partnership, was to combine, when we did our like adventure club, was to combine doing and being in the natural world. We had the benefit of being able to partner with our outdoor recreation program at Texas State University. So like I said, this was a partnership between the School of Social Work, the outdoor recreation program through Campus Rec, and then also the Poder Center, the Poder program at the San Marcos Housing Authority. And this project is still going on. Unfortunately, we weren't able to do it this year because of COVID restrictions. But in the past, we worked with about 25 youth ages 8 to 15, and we did hiking, whitewater rafting, rock climbing, nature walks, low and high ropes courses. And we were really trying to figure out this, kind of like looking at how this impacted them in terms of their connection, right, to themselves, to each other, to the natural world, and then also on their overall sense of well-being. So one of the things that we did was collect some observational data, as well as some staff surveys, youth feedback, and then reflections also from the graduate students who were working in this partnership. And one of the things that's really interesting is that the staff at the Poder Center, I mean, I cannot sing their praises enough. I already mentioned Jean and Maria, but it really is a program that is all about respect and dignity and self-worth and building capacity. It is not a program that is deficit oriented in any way. And so staff keep very meticulous notes on youth who are involved in the program. Some of the staff surveys, in this case, they observed youth before, during, and after their participation in the Adventure Club. And so that's some of the data. We're still analyzing it. Some of our data analysis has been put on hold, again, because of COVID. But some of the things that staff would log and look at, obviously they would look at behavioral incidents, but they would also look for demonstrations of leadership and acts of caring and connection. And they were really seeing that this Adventure Club was bringing together kind of this core group of kids who were getting really excited to be together in this new kind of environment. It's the same group of kids that's together in the after school program, but they were getting to be together in a new way, and they were getting to learn about each other in a new way. And some kids who I think about a couple of different kids in the program who were English language learners, and how maybe in the context of the Poder Center, they were quieter and a little more reserved and didn't take as much leadership. In the context of some of our outdoor adventure-based team building experiences, they were speaking up for the first time. It was just really cool to see some of those roles emerge in the outdoor adventure experiences. And so staff are really keeping track of some of that, some of those changes with an eye towards, again, strengths and assets that we're developing in these young people. We also got a lot of youth self-reports. So staff gathered verbal feedback from Adventure Club participants and their parents as part of the program evaluation. And honestly, one of the main things that we wanted to make sure was happening was that youth were having fun. I am a big believer that a therapeutic and an educational experience should be engaging. And certainly the experiential nature of the work that we were doing with these young people, that kinesthetic engagement, when we think about adventure therapy, it's kind of referred to in the literature as, the intentional use of outdoor adventure experiences to kinesthetically engage clients on cognitive, affective, and behavioral levels within the context of supportive relationships. That's the academic definition, but that's in fact what's really happening. And so it was really fun to watch the engagement of youth and to have kids talk about how, and especially because we would debrief with them, right? So they would do the ropes course, and then after, we would sit and talk and ask this question, like, what'd you learn about yourself? What surprised you about yourself today? What did you notice in other people? What did you notice in the natural world? And then sort of that big transfer of learning question, right, is like, and kids get it. Kids, I think human beings, we naturally think in metaphor, but I think kids are really good at it. It's kind of like this, like, well, how is this like your life? And kids would be like, oh, well, if I can do this, I can do that math test. And if I can do this, I can, play hard on the soccer team. I mean, it was just like this natural sense of how overcoming our fears in one environment can really translate into other areas of our life. So that was really exciting to hear them connecting the dots. And then one of the things that I also loved was youth using words like, I feel calmer, I feel more peaceful, again, having fun. They also talked a lot about noticing things in nature, like I just remember one little girl saying, oh, miss, I love the smell. I love the smell out here. It smells like flowers and dirt and grass. What is that smell? She was really, really keyed into that, the sense of smell in terms of her five senses. And from a sort of a neuroscience perspective, if you think of that present moment awareness as being deeply connected to our five senses, then we're in an outdoor environment. We can easily help kids who might be struggling with either ADHD or anxiety or some behavioral dysregulation. We can easily help them ground by quickly asking them, what are five things you see? What are four things you hear? What are three things you smell? What are two things you can touch? And then I always carry like a wintergreen lifesaver for the what's one thing you can taste, because otherwise you'll get kids who are like, I'm going to lick a rock, which probably won't kill them. But so it was really exciting to get this direct feedback from the youth that were involved in the program. And some of them were little and they were able to articulate this. It was great. We also got some really beautiful staff reflections, and I just wanted to share, this was a little piece that Maria, who works with the Poder Center, wrote up for the San Marcos Housing Authority newsletter last year. And I just think it's really beautiful. I'll just read it to you. It's kind of a story. And then on the next page, I think it gets into, again, the educational and therapeutic value of this kind of partnership. So she says, it was a beautiful Saturday morning when a van full of kids from Allen Woods and Chapultepec made their way to Texas State University Camp in Wimberley to experience outdoor team building activities and repeticle obstacle performance evaluation, ropes. So we actually call our ropes course something else, but I'm not sure where she got that acronym, but I like it. In a clearing in the woods, the group met with Dr. Christine Norton and her class to start off with icebreaker games, right? So a lot of what we wanted to do in the context of the Adventure Club was sequencing. We weren't going to start kids on this rock climbing tower, right? We wanted first to establish physical and emotional safety and build community. The course started with low exercises before lunch. The students and kids worked together to balance on a swinging log, to figure out how to stand as a group on a tilting platform without tipping it over, and to get through a maze while blindfolded. Now, this is where I think it gets interesting. Believe it or not, these exercises demonstrated important life skill lessons. For example, the maze helped kids realize how often we ourselves get stuck in a loop when there's a solution or a way out, if we think outside the box, or the circle in this case. So again, you can see metaphorically, their staff and their youth were connecting what we were doing in this outdoor environment with problem solving in their lives. During the lunch break, some of the kids got to see the beautiful Blanco River, which runs through the camp. After lunch, it was time for the much more challenging high ropes course. Each participant was strapped into a top rope belay or harness, which is attached by a rope to a higher point for safety. One of the university staff was an anchor on the ground for the participants that made the ascent. 2 courses were provided, a straight climbing wall and a continuous course. The kids who tried the continuous course claimed it was more vigorous but fun. Those that tried the straight climbing wall figured out the best route to climb. To get down, almost all the participants chose the option to zip line instead of just climb down. It was a fun and fast way to get down. And again, if you think about it, remember, one of the protective factors is rewards for pro-social behavior. And metaphorically, on a continuous high adventure course, a zip line is an excellent reward for, really challenging yourself and being brave. So it was fun to help kids, get to that place where they could do the zip line. At the end of the day, kids had overcome personal challenges and fears, strengthened together as a team, and enjoyed a day in nature. I love that reflection. And then finally, my students also kept journals as servant, leaders in the community. And so I love this one. And then one of my students wrote, "Who needs the trail? In fact, it's very clear that our experience together at Spring Lake today, with all the interactions, dynamic facilitation, and serene nature around us, made for an experience that will not soon be forgotten. First, the exchanges with the youth helped me see firsthand how experiences outdoors can create excitement and meaning." Keep in mind that we were, very disconnected from technology. It wasn't like kids were on their phones. I mean, this was a whole unplugged experience, which I think is kind of important to highlight here. Further, sequencing and facilitation leads to engagement. From the start of the day, when we started off with the name game, to our final debrief, picking a leaf to leave, I could see that the kids were involved and not bored. The scavenger hunt, we did a nature scavenger hunt. Effectively, we created a goal, and it allowed for engagement with nature around us. I am in awe of how this made walking so much more meaningful. So we did a nature hike while also doing the scavenger hunt. Similarly, the blindfolded tree hunt brought appreciation of the outdoors and trust building. Simply being outdoors had a huge effect. Being in nature allowed for many positive actions during our hike. The most significant was to witness the compassion we had for one another. So just to explain to you all the activity of the blindfolded tree hunt, many of you may have done this, but it's where it's like a trust walk. You have a partner and one is blindfolded if they consent, obviously, and they're comfortable with that, or they can just close their eyes. And the other guides them over to a tree with their eyes closed or the blindfold, and they have to feel the tree and walk around the tree and get to know the tree in a tactile way as much as they can. And then that person walks them away, spins them around again, and then you take your blindfold off and you have to try to figure out which was your tree. So it's a super fun way of engaging kids, a little bit like hide and seek, but also to promote that sense of nature connectedness. So I tell you the story because I'm going to come back to it at the end. So when we think about the overarching kind of findings that we've been discovering through some of this qualitative data, it really is that young people are developing stronger interpersonal connections and also stronger connections with nature. And they, again, are reporting that sense of well-being, especially in the moment, of being able to be calmer and feel more peaceful. And so some of the work that we're trying to do with them is also, how do we get them to anchor that internally so that those experiences in nature can be a resource for them in other stressful situations in their life, right? Whether that might be taking an exam or dealing with family conflict, whatever that might be. So this picture is actually not from one of our programs. Maria sent me this picture because once we started the Adventure Club, had youth saying, hey, we want to go back to Spring Lake. We want to go back and hike. And so even on their own now through the Poder Center, they're doing some of this programming, which is great. They don't have to wait on Texas State students or myself. They're building it into their program. And so Maria said, Christine, the craziest thing happened. We took this group of kids back, all these boys, elementary and middle school boys, and one of our boys ran over and he goes, hey, you guys, that's my tree. I got to show you my tree. And they all ran over and hugged this tree. Now, again, science, I don't want you to leave just thinking I'm a total tree hugger, but I am a tree hugger. But what I get excited about so much really is the developmental implications of this kind of love of nature, this impromptu, just expression of excitement and connection to this tree that happened outside of the program by a youth on his own that remembered and had clearly on his own anchored that experience. That type of anecdote gives me a lot of hope in this type of programming, and it feels very meaningful in kind of a poetic way, but it also feels meaningful in terms of the first small step in being able to address major mental health crises that our youth are facing, as well as issues like global climate change. I don't think we can take for granted such a small act of beauty and kindness. So I want to think about implications for our practice. I think that the findings of this study and this partnership could have implications for the inclusion of outdoor adventure programming to enhance positive youth development in public housing around the country. I think these partnerships between public housing and outdoor programming on college campuses, also with some intentional therapeutic facilitation, in our case from social work, is a really neat thing to consider and be intentional about building. I also got feedback. I had a couple of the moms that are involved in the San Marcos Housing Authority say, we want to go. Why can't we go whitewater rafting? And so I think my next step in this partnership will hopefully be to maybe offer some family-based outdoor adventure programming. I wanted to give a shout out. I know there are some people here from Texas Parks and Wildlife. Texas Outdoor Family is a newish initiative, but Texas Parks and Wildlife has been really intentional about doing these workshops to get to really it's not just a hashtag diversify the outdoors, but really, again, to create diversity, equity, inclusion, safety, mobility in the outdoors. Part of that is the familiarity with gear, how to set up a tent, how to use a stove, map and compass, all that good stuff. And so their program is another example of maybe a way that a partnership could be established. I think that from a research perspective, we're looking right now just at a lot of really rich qualitative data, but I think that more research needs to be done to assess kind of specific behavioral changes in youth. I mean, it would be great to know specifically, are there reductions in mental health issues? Certainly this was not a clinical intervention, so we kind of stayed away from that, but I think the potential is there to look at that, as well as educational outcomes. I'm actually working with a program in Chicago right now called Chicago Voyagers. That is an outdoor adventure program that partners with community service agencies, alternative schools, and they are looking at discipline referrals, attendance, so truancy, discipline referrals, grade, GPA, as well as other indicators of positive youth development. So they're kind of doing both in their research and evaluation. So I think that that's where the future of these partnerships in terms of evaluation can go. So I'm excited. I love public health. I think that social work and public health have a lot of similarities, but I do believe that my work as a research scientist with the Outdoor Behavioral Healthcare Center and as a social work professor at Texas State University has been very focused on mental health. And I think that's important. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, so it is my area of expertise. However, I really think that when it comes to outdoor experiences and the healing power of nature, that public health is where it's at. And the reason I say that is because I think that getting people outside, if you see this little quadrant here of this integrated health model, that just getting kids and families outside is a way of health promotion and prevention. And the linkage that I'm really interested in is looking at children and families with high ACEs scores, right? Adverse childhood experiences. So if we have people that are really, really in need of trauma recovery, how can these nature-based interventions help with that? again, through early identification, intervention, recovery, and then eventually treatment for people who need it. I was also involved in a Hogg Foundation sponsored research project with Child Safe in San Antonio, which has a beautiful program called FEAT, which is Family Enrichment Adventure Therapy, and they provide outdoor adventure therapy for children and families who have made an outcry of physical or sexual abuse. And they work with non-offending family members, but they do multi-family group work outdoors. And part of that is to reestablish a sense of normalcy in the family system and get the family communicating. And the research that we've done on that program has shown that it does reduce the trauma symptomology of children, and it enhances the family's functioning. So there's just a lot of exciting places that we can take this, but it's going to take a real coordinated effort on the public health front, I think. So I'm excited to have a discussion, and I think I'm out of time in terms of my bit. I'm going to maybe ask Sarah to help us open it up for questions. I also just want to say, I gave you a ton of resources in terms of professional groups that are doing a lot of this work, and also links to more research if you're interested in that. And then, of course, I wouldn't be a good academic if I didn't give you my bibliography of references, right? So if you want to read more, there's no pop quiz though, but please stay in touch with me if this sparked your interest. I know people all over the country. I know people all over the world that are involved in this work, and I'm excited as well to learn from all of you and the wisdom that's here on the call. So please stay in touch. There's my email. There's my cell phone. And Sarah, I think I'll just open it up for some questions and discussion.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So our first question is from Laura Allen, and she is at Trinity University, and they are developing a course kind of similar to the one you started with, and she was wondering if you would be willing to share your syllabus.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Laura is your name? I was curious, Laura, if you are in social work or counseling. What is your discipline?
No, we're in education. Courtney Krim is also, I think, on this webinar.
Okay.
And we are doing research on the benefits of mental health with college-age students as well as pre-service teachers. And what we are working on now is to develop a course for undergrads that crosses our environmental science as well as our education program to help them understand the benefits of the outdoors. And I just think that your course, part of that is has an education component, like looking at K-12 kids and that. And so I think it would be really helpful for us, because we're actually we met yesterday to work over the first draft of our syllabus. So I'd love to see your syllabus.
Sure, I'll email it to you. Yeah, just
that looks like.
If you shoot me an email, Laura, just because that's how I remember things. As soon as something's in my inbox, I'm like, oh God. And Laura and others on the call, I don't know if you are familiar with the Association for Experiential Education, but AEE is sort of an umbrella organization that is all things outdoor experiential. And so you will find your people at AEE, I would say, for sure. I know there are also environmental ed organizations, but I feel like AEE is this great umbrella where we have environmental educators, we have outdoor therapists, we have K through 12 folks, we have higher ed. I know I also was working with Susan Denny, who's no longer there. She was at UTSA, and she ran a pilot collegiate adventure therapy program. So that was another really meaningful partnership between Outdoor Rec and a college counseling center, because we can't meet all of the unmet mental health needs of college students these days, especially with COVID. And then telehealth, it's just not for everyone. And then group therapy on telehealth is kind of strange. So this outdoor therapy model for groups on college campuses is another partnership that we're really looking at evaluating. So that's exciting, Laura.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next question is from Kim Ogden, and she wrote, if it will be called therapy, we should have social workers or counselors present. I think in our enthusiasm, it could be easy to get in over our heads. We can teach self-regulation and mindfulness with setting some limitations. Is there a professional organization for social workers or therapists who use these techniques to include if we need access to those services?
Yes, there is. Great question. First of all, thank you so much, Kim. Your name sounds familiar. I know a Kim Ogden. Maybe it's you. I don't know. I really appreciate you making the distinction between therapeutic outdoor experiences and then outdoor therapy, right? So when we think about outdoor adventure therapy, it is the prescriptive use of outdoor experiences for therapeutic purposes facilitated by a licensed mental health professional. But we can still engage youth outdoors and have it be therapeutic without being a mental health professional. We're just not calling it therapy, and we're not getting in over our heads. One of the things I recommend is that if you are doing that and you want to have some facilitation and debriefing involved, get certified in mental health first aid or psychological first aid. You don't have to be a mental health professional to have those basic clinical first responder type skills as a facilitator. So that's one thing. But then if you want to access resources in the field of adventure therapy, again, through the Association for Experiential Education, we have a professional group called the Therapeutic Adventure Professional Group. And it is a group of, so TAPG. So it is a group of psychologists, social workers, LPCs, therapists, rec therapists, marriage and family therapists, all of whom use outdoor adventure in more formal therapeutic settings. So that group, there's a Facebook group, but then there's also a formal professional group that you can join, and conferences you can attend and trainings you can go to. So
wonderful. Our next one is from Courtney Krim, and she's wondering how this project that you did was funded.
Yeah, so I mean, student volunteers, right? Hello, service learning class. It's part of their academic credit. So I had the people power. But in terms of, we did pay outdoor recreation, like for the fees to use the low and high ropes course, to go whitewater rafting, we've done indoor climbing at our rock wall. And so the outdoor rec center does have fees associated with that. I happened to write a small grant, a service learning grant, an internal grant at Texas State. But you are right that these programs require funding, because what you want to do is make it free for youth and families in public housing. There shouldn't be any fee. So there was no fee to the folks at the Podair Center. It was all funded through a small service learning grant. And that's tough, right? Funding is always a big issue, but I'm the kind of person, I don't know, probably for better or for worse. I'm like, any good program, you should at least be able to start it on like kind of a shoestring, with just a lot of goodwill to see if it even works and makes an impact. And then from there, once you have some of this good pilot data, then you can take it to a funder and say, hey, we could talk about scaling this or making this a little more regular or consistent, because look at some of the results we have.
I do wonder if this is something that maybe the co-op grant from Texas Parks and Wildlife would be interested in funding, for those of you that are.
Yeah. And that's how I will give a shout out to that co-op grant, FEAT, Family Enrichment Adventure Therapy. The program I mentioned at Child Safe in San Antonio was originally funded by that grant. They may still receive that grant funding. It's very exciting. It's a great grant.
So our next question is from Myra Palant. And she asks, what kinds of permission slips do you use? And do you take photos and give copies to the children to keep and share?
Yeah. So all of the permission comes through the Podair Center. Like, they get a release for their kids to have their photos included in the newsletter and things like that. So they take care of all of that. And then we just follow their lead and just post pictures that they've already sanctioned. But in terms of photos that we take, that is funny you ask, because I love taking pictures when I'm outside, even though there's my phone again. But yes, what we have done is print out pictures of the Adventure Club, and then we've sent them to the Podair Center and they have them up on the wall. And it's funny you mentioned that, because there was a program in New Zealand that was doing outdoor adventure with youth in residential care, foster youth, and they would have an adventure day. I think Thursday was their adventure day, where they would get to leave the residential facility. So it was a big behavioral incentive, but also one of the things they would do was they would take photos of their adventure day, and then throughout the week they would print out those photos and they would do like a form of almost digital storytelling to build resilience and a more resilient sense of self and identity through those photos. So I think that's kind of an untapped resource.
So those are our last questions.
Great. Well, we're very timely.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Norton. There have been a few questions about the recording in the chat. This recording will get put up on our YouTube channel, and I'll share the link with everyone who's registered. And so you'll be able to share that with anyone who wasn't able to make it today. And then one other question that I have, Dr. Norton, is if you would be willing to share your PowerPoint so that everyone can get those studies and stuff that you registered.
Sarah, I will email that to you as soon as we finish the call.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Our next session is in February, and it is on art and writing in nature. So talking about some nature journaling. And Larry Joe Edwards from the Coastal Bend Basin Estuaries Program will be leading that workshop for us in February. So be sure to go ahead and register for that. It's up on our website, and I'll definitely be sharing the registration link for that with a follow-up email as well.
Awesome. So, thank you guys so much. Thank you all for being here, and thanks for hosting.
Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.